I'll say. We're ready to begin. We'll give everybody a few minutes to get to their chair. We'll begin this work session. Call it in order. This is a planned Rutherford work session for the Rutherford County Planning Commission on July 28th. We have, I think, just about everyone here other than Trey Gooch this morning. So we'll begin where we're going to work. We mentioned some things at our last meeting, our work study, and I'll turn that over to Director Doug DeMasi.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As Mr. Reed stated, we do have just a number of things to kind of work through today. And I've passed out a sheet for the planned Rutherford work session. These were the items that we needed to discuss as I understood them. I did share this with Pettis prior to the meeting, and he agreed that this pretty much covered everything. Of course, if there's anything else that you guys can think about, we can certainly talk about them. I think what I'm going to do, though, I kind of put these, you can kind of see I put them in order, really, of the pages themselves. But I think what I might do is maybe start from the bottom and kind of work our way up. The first item I know we talked about, and Mr. Everwater, I believe this was something that you had discussed with us about changing the horizon on the Action 17 for Enabling Prosperity, which dealt with affordable housing. We were showing it as a long-term to a type project, but making it more of a short-term project. And I think even during the meeting, I think we said that, Mike, could you pull up the plan on page 82, please? And we have a copy of the plan here that we can bring before you so we can kind of see, everybody can see what we're talking about here. Yeah, I don't know if it'll let you do that, Mike. Yeah, we just have to kind of, yeah. Mike's going to kind of thumb through the pages here until there's probably an easier way to do it than what we're doing, but we'll get to it. Of course, these that we have on here, these, just as a little bit of background, these are proposed action items. It doesn't mean that we're going to do every single action item. These are just recommendations. But you'll see under number 17, it says engage municipalities, housing experts, home builders, et cetera, on long-term housing needs and near-term strategies for preserving the affordability of existing and new housing stock. Of course, this is going to be a partnership, not so much the county acting as a lead entity. It'd kind of be a shared project, if you will. We did have that as a long-term horizon. I don't think that indicated the importance of the project. This is why we thought it was long-term, probably more just because of the issues involved in it, really. But we're more than happy to make that a short-term improvement, and I'd be more than happy to ask our consultant team to make that change. I think that's a pretty straightforward type change. There's no time frames necessarily identified in here, but we do know that it is something that does need to be addressed. And like I said, it's going to take a village, not just the county. It's going to take all entities of Rutherford County to address. So,
and perhaps it's me misunderstanding the definition of horizon and the timelines. It's something that I feel like when you said long term, that's something that's going to be started way down the road sometime. If you mean that this is something that needs to start sooner than later and continue for a while, in other words, reassess it from time to time, then that's kind of what I'm thinking. And I don't know if that's the meaning of the way it's written here.
Right, and it could be just because of the fact that it might mean different things to different people. I think changing that to short term is probably appropriate. That way we can just go ahead and say, okay, yes, let's go ahead and make this short term. We can at least start laying some groundwork down. The solutions themselves are probably going to take time to consider and try to figure out. But again, from a staff standpoint, we don't have any problem changing that. So if everybody's okay with that.
That mutual agreement to everyone that you see that change? Okay.
Okay. Most of the rest of the changes that we're going to be discussing are going to be concerning the densities in the different character areas, the rural preserve, the rural living, and the county suburban. Mike, if you could go ahead and go to page 60. We'll just start with the lower end densities in the rural preserve, kind of start there with that discussion. The application of policy that's at the very top of that page that I passed out, I'm not going to get to that quite yet because I'll be referring to it on a couple different, at least one different occasion while we're talking through these, so I don't think it needs to be discussed specifically by itself because it kind of dovetails into some of the others. But Mike's got right here, what you can see is the page 4 of the rural preserve. What we're talking about is that lower end density and the higher end density toward the bottom of the page there. You can see the higher end density is less than 1 residential unit per 5 acres. The lower end density is 1 residential unit per 15 acres. You'll recall we've had a lot of discussion about that. And the big issue that we've got with it from staff standpoint, and I think that some of the issues that I think the Planning Commission had after hearing staff's explanation was the fact that in Tennessee, of course, if it's over 5 acres, it has road frontage and all of that, that doesn't have to be platted. That can just be divided by a subdivision deed by a surveyor. That goes straight to the Register of Deeds office. That's not something that we really will ever take a look at. There's some exceptions to that when it comes to things like private easements and things like that, but those are exceptions to the rule. So we've made a couple of recommendations here for at least to consider. And as I stated on the sheet that I passed out, again, the concern is that I think that there's concern out in the general community that we plan to downzone properties to a minimum size of 15 acres, which we've already said we really don't want to get involved in because there's no way we can enforce that. The example I used during some of our other meetings was I don't want to be in a situation where if they're in an area of 15 acres, somebody comes in and has tracked off 10 acres and wants to build a house, and I have to tell them, oh, sorry, I can't let you build your house because you have a 10-acre tract when you were required to have a 15-acre, when there was no way that they could have known that, no way we could have known to enforce it or anything like that. So our recommendation would be one of two things. You could either change that lower end density to 1 unit per residential unit, 1 residential unit per 5 acres, or you could add some language in there. We had talked about adding a potential of voluntary larger lot zoning, something like Williamson County has done, where they've got the ability to zone a piece of property where there is a minimum acreage of, like, say, 15 or 20 acres, but it's not something that they actively go out and try to enforce or place on properties. It's something that a landowner can say, I want to have this particular zoning. They run it through the process, it's zoned that way, life goes on. So either way, I think that's a way to change that. So that's kind of what I would like some discussion on, is kind of what the Planning Commission might consider for that.
Commissioner?
For the voluntary, I mean, I think that's fine. I like this idea of, so would the landowner they would just come and request that we rezone there? We're going to create a new section or
Well, it'd basically be a new zoning classification.
Okay.
And it's actually, you can see in here that it's consistent with language on page 90. Mike, you don't have to change to that if you don't want to. But page 90 of the plan actually makes a recommendation that we do develop a voluntary zoning district for larger lots, greater than 5 acres. So again, that would be something that the county would go out and try to zone property for. It'd be something that it'd be more, like you said, like a voluntary thing.
And as a landowner, they may say, well, I don't want to hamstring my future descendants and tell them that they can't develop that land one day, but at least I'll make them go through a few extra steps. Is that what they would have to do? Because if my great-grandfather went into this voluntary zoning and then it finally passes down to me, mm-hmm. He's long gone, I can't ask him, but I could come to the Planning Commission to have it rezoned back to something else.
Yes, you could. And that zoning district would not just apply in the rural, they could do that anywhere,
sure.
I suppose. If they wanted to do it in a county subdivision, the county suburban area, there's no reason they couldn't voluntarily ask for that. But like you said, if they wanted to come back, descendants wanted to come and say, hey, we see that things in this area have changed, can we change this back? It would just go through the same process.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. Mm-hmm. I think that's about as good as we could ask for then, being that the state says that if it's 5 acres, we can't That's the state's, like, they can do.
That's the definition of a subdivision, anything less than 5 acres. Anything greater than that, like I said, as long as it meets minimum zoning requirements.
That would be my recommendation for us to do.
Which direction? I'm sorry.
The 5-acre density and then and creating the voluntary zone for greater.
Okay, so on the lower end of what Mike's got up on the screen here, do we want to change the lower end, or do we want to add some language to that? I mean, I guess that's what I'm asking.
I guess I would keep if we kept the higher end at less than 1 per 5 acres, that would meet the state's requirements.
Yes.
And then just change the wording for lower end and just create the voluntary zoning classification.
To say less than 1 residential unit per 15 acres, kind of like I outlined here, some language saying, see page 90 for a particular potential recommendation for a voluntary larger
Yes.
lot zoning district, something like that.
Yes.
Doug,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
just want to make sure I understood that. So what would change on this is the lower end is just adding the verbiage for the voluntary zoning?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure.
Does anybody have any questions on that? Any other further discussion on that? All right. All right. We'll now move into the rural living. Mike, if you could go to page 62. Okay, this is probably the one that's had the most discussion, really, out of all of the character areas that we've looked at. The concern that we've run into is allowing for denser developments in this character area that have what is termed adequate infrastructure. Some of the discussion that we've had, and I know that I've had with some folks that I've talked to, isn't so much about again, we're looking at the recommended densities, the lower end versus the higher end. I don't think it's so much the lower end that people have the concern about. It's more the higher end, up to 1 residential unit per acre. I know I've had several discussions. I know we've had some discussions here amongst the Planning Commission regarding that higher end density being up to 1 residential unit per acre. Well, what happens if there's a piece of property in this rural living area, especially if you're really near that county suburban kind of dividing line, where it might just be right over the line, but there's a piece of property in a rural living, but it's got a good road, it's got good infrastructure, it's got good soils, good water coming to it. Are we going to make them do 1 unit per acre, or are there going to be some allowances for some denser type developments? And this is kind of where I want to get to that application of policy language that's on that handout that I gave you. It's that first thing. I don't want to necessarily read this word for word, but you can see the discussion and that's been in the book on page 56 and 57. But yeah, Mike's got it right there on the screen. And it basically says, while we do specify desired mixture of uses, lot sizes, and densities, it should be recognized that land development will not occur uniformly across the entire character area. The density range is provided to guide zoning and development review process. Densities will be a product of developer proposals and the analysis of land to support the proposed project. Parcels closer to existing municipal limits or with infrastructure in place will be prioritized for higher densities during the county's review of development proposals. So that's kind of what I would say is kind of like the cover for some of these developments that may be in, say, the rural living or even in the rural preserve area, although that's probably not going to happen as often. But when you start getting these areas that are kind of between the dividing line between the county suburban and then the county rural area, I think this provides us with a lot of cover, even from a zoning standpoint of, okay, just because we approve a development that might slightly exceed some of the recommendations of the county's land use plan that's identified in Plan Rutherford, this is why. It's because we saw this area, we felt that it, for various reasons, and we can lay those out when it comes to the zoning of the property, we can lay that out when it comes to, is anybody asking for a rezoning or a plan development or something like that? We could say, these are the reasons why, and list them why we approve this. Yes, the land use plan may have said this from a recommendation, but based off of these reasons, this is why we felt it was more appropriate. So in rural living, some of the changes we did discuss were changing that higher end density, whereas right now where it says I think it's 1 unit per acre, Mike's going to pull that back up, so scroll down back to the bottom there. Thank you. Less than one lower, no, I'm sorry, go to the next one, the rural living. This is preserved still. Just go over a couple pages over. 2 more pages, I think is where it is, page 62. There you go. Yes, thank you. So that higher end is up to 1 residential unit per acre. So what we could do in there, we could do a couple things. We could leave it as is, specifically reference that language, or, and we do both, we could discuss changing that higher end up to 2 residential units per acre, which would basically be a minimum of a half-acre type zone. And then, again, reference that language, that application of policy, something to the effect of you could have up to 2 residential units per acre, assuming adequate infrastructure is in place, looking at application of policy from pages 56, 57, or something like that. We could add some language in there for that reason. So those are a couple ways to address that item. But I wanted to specifically call out that application of policy because I know there's been a lot of discussion about, well, what happens if this is in an area that's identified as 1 unit per acre, but they can get some higher density? Well, there's some allowances for that. So, and again, I think there's a lot of folks that maybe get a little too focused on these pages. And again, it's the whole plan you got to look at, not just these pages, because it's all, in context. But I can see where there'd be a little confusion, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that everybody knows, yes, we are taking that into consideration for those type of situations. So I know that's a whole lot of talking. I don't know if I made a point or not, but feel free to, I'm curious to see what the Planning Commission thinks on that.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Doug, good points, and I'm in agreement with the discussion and the talk about denser developments in that rural living. But I have 2 questions. How do we define adequate infrastructure? Because I can see that being a point of contention at some point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully not in a court of law, but I can see that being he said, she said kind of a thing. And then secondly, second question is, say you have 20 acres and the surveyor divides up the property and for easy math, say you have 20 acres, but you can get 50 houses on it. Well, that's a little bit more than 2 per acre. So do you just, if you've got the adequate infrastructure, if you got good soils, you got water, you got everything that we've talked about, do you say no if it's 2.3 houses per acre? Do you just draw a hard line? What are we going to do at that point?
Yeah, to answer, I'll take your questions in the order you asked them. As far as defining what adequate infrastructure is, I think that's going to be a product of what we put in our regulations, our zoning and our subdivision regulations, as far as what we feel is adequate. Even if it's something is not defined as adequate, like I'll use traffic and roads for an example. The process that we started about a year ago with the traffic studies, in my mind at least, has shown quite a bit of fruit already with some of the road improvements that we've seen some of these developments having to undertake as a result. So it may not be adequate when they first look at it, but based on traffic studies, or even let's just use water availability. Sometimes they have to expand water lines to the property in order to serve the development. Those expansions at that point would make it adequate infrastructure in order to accomplish what it is that they're trying to do to the development. But that's on the developer. That's not necessarily, it's something that the county is taking care of. So a lot of it's going to depend on how we define adequate in our regulations. That's the easiest way I can say that. To answer your other question, if I'm understanding it correctly, I think that goes back a lot to that language we just talked about, the application of policy, understanding that, and this is regardless of what is on these recommended densities, either the lower end or the higher end. Let's say we did change it and it was up to 2 residential units per acre and something came in just a little bit higher than that. The same thing could happen if we left it alone and something comes in, let's say instead of 1 unit per acre, it's like 1.5. Let's just throw that out there. Most of the RM developments that we see, typically, our conventional RM zone, average right about that. Once you take into account the step area, once you take into account all the roads that they have to put in, all the infrastructure that has to be placed, easements, stormwater ponds, those kind of things. Nobody's getting 2.9 units per acre in the RM zone, which is the gross density that's allowed. So I think with this language in here, the application of policy, I think that does allow some wiggle room. Even if it's, let's say it's 2.2, 2.3 units per acre, the plan recommended up to 2 units per acre. Based on that language, I don't think you're necessarily in violation of anything. That's Doug's opinion. Like you said, hopefully it has not to go to a court of law or anything. But when we look at it and say, well, you know, they meet certain density requirements because of the fact that they had a good road, they were extending water, which made it a better project, made it viable, had good fire protection, you know, add in whatever it is that, you know, we're going to include on that, then I think the language provides a lot of cover, regardless of what we end up identifying as recommended densities, even if they do happen to exceed those just a little bit. Now, it's one thing if they do that. Now, it's a whole nother item, I think. It's a whole nother issue if they come in and they want to do a huge townhome development. It's like 10 units an acre. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, that's probably not what we would recommend in an area for rural living if somebody wanted to come in and do like a high-rise apartment complex or something like that, which realistically, is the county going to see something like that? Probably not, because at that point, you need sewer in order to make it viable, and sewer just isn't really that far out in any areas like that.
So I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I think what I'm hearing you say is, if, as the proposed language is set in rural living, if the adequate infrastructure is defined and we find a piece of land that meets all the adequate infrastructure, roads, water, you name it, the boxes are checked. If somebody comes in and the math is 2.3, that's not a hard no. But if they come in at 2.9, that may be a hard no.
Yeah, the higher it gets, I think it becomes harder to justify, especially depending on where you are in the rural area, or the rural living area. Again, if it's right there at the border,
Yeah.
you know, you might give a little more allowances to that.
Okay.
If you're kind of at the border of rural living versus rural preserve, you know, is that really something you want to look at out there?
Okay.
Yeah.
So everything basically is open for review.
Yeah, they can always ask. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that doesn't change. I mean, that's no different than today. We always tell people that you can apply. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. So, yeah.
Commissioner, the way I look at that, it's sort of like what we did this morning. You know, we had the one here that Planning Commission just really didn't like what was being done. And we come to finally a discussion, a meeting of minds to make it work and what you had to do there. We've always said about Plan Rutherford that it's a living document, that it's changing, that we can work with it and go that way, and that's what we tried to do. My situation with this being from the very beginning and having worked with it from the very beginning, I've got to go back and look at what those people that showed up at Lascassas, you know, Christiana, and all those places, and what they wanted in Plan Rutherford. They were the people that showed up. You know, I've always heard if you show up, that's important. It's those that, you know, show up maybe later and say, hey, this is what I wanted. You got to look at those first people that did show up and say, hey, what I wanted. And they were very adamant about protecting some of this area out there and what we're looking for. So we can't expand too far, the way I see it. When you take a map that we have right here, and a lot of those people come from this area. And if we expand beyond that too far, that's what we get into, and I think that's what Doug is trying to show here. We're trying to work in the area to do something with that as far as that goes. And I think you're totally right there. When you know, 2.3 or whatever you're saying there, we'll try to see what can be done there. And who says what's adequate and what you're talking about there? I suggest to individuals to get in their vehicle and drive in that green area around this county. And you look for what is adequate in those areas of what we're talking about. That's the key. Oh, it looks good on the top. But underneath, I was just telling them this morning, I just had a Middle Tennessee Electric just dug a hole for a light pole on my property. And they were showing how much topsoil was in it. And then all of a sudden they got down to what was down below that, and then you didn't go very far, and it was all dry soil. No water was penetrating at all. Reason being, about as far down as how this is tall was all a very red clay. No penetration in that soil. No water got through. So what I'm telling you, it flooded very easily if you had a lot of rain. That's what's out here in this green area, a lot of this. So it's what you look at overall and what the infrastructure will be there. And that's why I'm saying it's a living plan. What works now, and we're talking about several years down the road, it's changeable in what we have to do. That's what we have to keep in mind when we do this. That to keep it alive and what we got to do, we may have to work with some things as we go. So I think that's good comments, Commissioner.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I agree that this green section is the one that gives me the most pause to make sure that we get it right as best we can for this plan. My fear in increasing it from 1 to 2 houses per acre is that people are going to see that and default to, I can get 2 houses. And as I've heard several times here, that this does not prevent them from asking for more if the property is right. And so I would encourage us to leave it as it is with 1 per acre and add the language that tells people that you may apply for higher density and that application will be examined on a case-by-case basis. Because I think that every time that I've gone over Plan Rutherford with a group of people, these sections in the summary sections on pages like 60, to start on 60 through 64.
In that area, yes, sir.
Yeah. That's where everybody does go. So I think that's because they want the Cliff Notes version. They don't want to read the whole plan. I get it. So I think that I would be in favor of leaving it as it is stated now and adding in the extra language that tells them that they can still apply for higher density and that application will be examined on a case-by-case basis for the things that we've mentioned.
Anyone else? Commissioner Brown? I saw you grave for the mic.
I do agree with Commissioner Shirley on that. I'm just the only thing we will be doing in this plan if we did change the higher end is just putting a hard boundary there, right? As opposed, because we have that application of policy that we have the flexibility. But if we were to make the change is just making it known for people that they can make that change, or they can put the 2 acre or the 2 homes per acre.
Well, I mean, I think it's a matter, I think if I'm understanding the discussion, these are the recommendations, but can you ask for something maybe a little beyond that? I mean, kind of using the examples like what Mike was saying, we'll just kind of go, instead of saying, and like I said, when it comes to a lot of RM developments that we see, they average somewhere between 1.5 units per acre.
Sure.
If the minimum is 1 unit per acre, the recommended density, and somebody comes in and says, well, this development's going to be like 1.2, 1.3, it's in this area, it's got good roads, got good infrastructure, would we consider that? Yeah, they could ask, and, that would be considered by the Planning Commission as far as, is that, and ultimately the County Commission as far as whether or not that's going to be appropriate. Now, again, using his example even further, if somebody comes in again with a townhome or a development like a high-rise apartment complex, when it's only 1 unit per acre and they want to do like 10 to 12 units per acre, it's the same thing we do now, really, is to evaluate, is that appropriate in that location?
Correct.
So, yeah.
And I think that's what I was trying to wrap my head around, is just seeing the benefit of documenting that change when we already have the flexibility within the policy. So that's where I was just stuck in my
Right.
thoughts. But thank you for the clarity.
Right, and I think it's important, and I don't think that'd be a hard lift to have our consultant team add some language, or just reference the language for the application of policy, and just to make sure that everybody's aware, yes, that we're not saying that you just never can ask, and that it's always going to be a hard no regardless of what application comes in if it doesn't meet these density requirements. There's just factors we need to look at, and it may be appropriate in some areas and not others. I don't think that's a hard lift.
Application of policy has always been here. It's always been a part of it. But You know, you've always been told it never hurts to ask. And I think that's part of what Plan Relevant has been all along. We've always told people that it's not the Ten Commandments. It's not coming down as one solid piece, that if it's there, that you can do that. You know, I have to always look back at the Burgess property. You know, we looked at that and we kept working and working. And then the developer started putting things in them themselves to make it a workable piece of property. And that's probably what we'll see coming down the road, is more people, as we're working together. And I think that's what it says in here, that, and we work together to make it a workable piece of property. We make it go that way. So it doesn't hurt to ask what we want to do there. But that's where that's at. Someone else? That's why we have a work session. It's to figure it out.
I think, you know, it's called rural living, and so it's trying to balance that. You know, I also would encourage developers and landowners to be creative in their solutions and bring stuff to us that we've never seen before. Maybe, if someone has 50 acres and they put a row of townhouses right up on the road, but then leave the entire rest of that whole property as a communal shared pasture and they have a community barn or something like that. Like that still is rural living. It's just that house looks a little different up there, you know. So, again, I go back to, I think that if we change it, people are they're going to default to the maximum as what they're allowed to do without any question. And I don't think that that's what this green section, the rural living, should be. Okay. I think that we should leave it as it is currently stated as far as density, but add in the section about allowing them to come and make applications so that it is clear that they can ask for more.
Right, that it's not a hard no just because.
That's correct.
And based on what you were just saying about, maybe some more intuitive options, if you will, something like that, I would put in there too, I would submit, this is a discussion that we've had. I know that Jason Beavers and I have talked about this, about the possibility of what they call conservation design type subdivisions, where basically it's doing exactly what you're talking about. You've got smaller lots, the allowance for smaller lots, even in an area like rural living or even rural preserve. You're still keeping the overall density. However, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, you're going to build the houses in this area. It's more compact, and then the rest of it is set aside for preservation in perpetuity. There's no reason we can't start looking at those kind of things now, okay? Just so we're all aware of that. I think that plays into that. I don't think that's saying, these densities are not saying, okay, yes, the zoning district may say, the density may not be saying that, sorry, just had a lapse of thought here. It's not saying that every lot has to be an acre in such a situation like that, but the overall density is what you'd be looking at, something like that.
So you want to get a vote on what?
I mean, just a consensus of what everybody's feeling, I guess, I think is,
Leave it
yeah.
as it is?
But adding that language in there, and yeah, okay, that's what the
Got
consensus.
several heads shaking.
Yeah, I agree with what Mr. Shirley's saying. I think it's really simple what we're trying to do here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So if we're done with that, the last one I think we need to talk about is under county suburban, and that's this is the area that's in the UGBs, primarily is what we're seeing. I think there are some areas maybe just a little outside, but for the most part, these are the areas within the urban growth boundaries. The concern that I've heard is that there will be downzoning within the urban growth boundaries, downzoning from what it currently is. Most of the areas in the urban growth boundaries right now are zoned the RM, residential medium density, which is basically 3 units per acre, which you've already discussed, is not realistic. You're never going to get that. You might get 1.5, sometimes 2, depending on how kind of soils you have and things like that. So I will say that I think what the the concern has been on that lower end density. You'll recall that on the higher end, we actually bumped that up just a little bit to allow for a little denser type development, especially in the urban growth boundaries, especially if you get closer to the city limits, where it's probably more appropriate. It's that lower end where I think there was some concern that the county is going to come in and do some sort of, mass rezoning to downzone those areas, which quite frankly is not something, and I've shared this with the folks I've talked to, we're not looking to do that because that kind of defeats the whole purpose of the plan as we have it envisioned in the first place, trying to encourage denser development within the urban growth boundaries closer to the municipalities. So that'd be kind of, like I said, defeating the purpose of the plan in the first place. So that language there on the lower end, one residential unit per acre, I mean, we could simply just say lower end density could be existing zoning. We could say, 2.9, I mean, however you want to do it. I don't think that's a fix that I'm really too terribly concerned about because, like I said, that's just not something we were looking to do in the first place. If somebody wanted to, keep their property zoned in such a way that, it was greater than that, that's fine. We don't really care. But, that's the concern that's been shared with me is that, there's a fear that there may be some mass downzoning in the county UGBs. So that's kind of what I bring up for discussion today.
I have one comment here. Well, I'll start with one comment. If we are going to allow city-type developments in the county, we need to look at city-type regulations within those neighborhood standards, regulations. In this 2 pages on page 64 and 65, unless I'm mistaken, every single one of those pictures has sidewalks in them. And I know that anyone that's watched the past few meetings here of the Planning Commission knows that I'm really troubled by the amount of density that we're putting in our county neighborhoods with no sidewalks and forcing those people to walk in the street and kids to ride their bikes in the road with or without long straightaways. But I just want that on the record. I don't see anything in here, and I don't know, and I know that sidewalks, maybe Plan Rutherford isn't the place for that. It needs to be in our subdivision regulations. But I would like something in Plan Rutherford that indicates the desire for us to see if we're going to put 5 units per acre, that neighborhood, in my opinion, has to have pedestrian and bicycle type of accommodations in there and traffic calming measures in our neighborhoods. And I don't see that in the plan anywhere, but I would like for us to work that in on this page too, especially on that higher end density.
Just an FYI, the engineering department is working on updating the 1974 street specifications, long overdue. And one of the things that we would like to propose is sidewalks in subdivisions and also underground utilities.
Absolutely, yeah. And I realize that the developers will say, well, people, that's going to make housing unaffordable. I realize that and we brought up at the last work session or last meeting that we had, what's our role in trying to tell people what they can sell property for? Like, that's not exactly what we're doing here. I'm glad to hear include that in Plan Rutherford, which gives a little bit more weight to why we're trying to make these changes, because it's in our plan, or it's in our vision.
I can give you a little bit of history on that. When we did the last comprehensive plan, when we went into the zoning and the regulations, it was suggested, I think at that time, sidewalks, curving, and never got out of there. We didn't do that. We just never could get the support for it or wanted to go that way. So that is something that after Plan Rutherford comes, zoning and regulation will come. That's where sidewalks and those sort of things will happen. That's where you'll do that. But I know what you're talking about right there. You mentioned bicycles for sidewalks or sidewalks for bicycles. I haven't seen anybody on a sidewalk anywhere lately. But But I'm just saying that's where that usually comes from, because you have to regulate that to get those built to do that. So Plan Rutherford does not regulate.
Correct, because we have seen that if you leave it up to the developers, they're not going to include those very often. I won't say never, but not very often, because I realize it makes the lots, it makes the infrastructure more expensive, which gets passed on to the
Zoning and
consumer.
regulations will come up to the
Sure.
planning commission, and then a final vote will come through the
Right.
commission. Right?
But because we're not seeing them voluntarily, I think that we need to let them know that, like, there's a give and take. If you're wanting 5 houses in an acre, I want sidewalks. Like, let's go. Yeah.
Well, and I think, to Mike's comment about updating the regulations, of course, this is something I know we've been talking about, that we know we need to do. It's just trying to find the time to do it, of course. It's just, with everything else going on, I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. It's hard to concentrate on those kind of things, but we know that needs to be done. There's going to be a lot of discussion regarding that. There's going to be changes probably to the zoning code. To answer your question, Pettis, anything that goes through the zoning code to be changed has to go before the planning commission for a recommendation and to the full county commission for approval. If it's a subdivision regulation change, it just comes here to the planning commission. It doesn't go any further than that. So there has to be, there's certain notification requirements, public hearings that you have to do so many days in advance. But depending on what's being changed, it may or may not have to go to the full county commission. But I'm in agreement with what you're saying as far as, and I'll comb through the plan myself to see if there was some discussion. It could simply be just some addition to this page here, looking under transportation and open space about, higher densities should have things, maybe not making specific recommendations, but say could use amenities such as sidewalks, such as open space, such as, these kind of things. I think that'd be kind of an easy fix for something like that. But like I said, as far as the density is concerned, just so we're all clear, the county's not in any, we're not interested in making a bunch of downzoning recommendations within the urban growth boundaries because, again, that defeats the whole purpose of what we're trying to do. So to that end, maybe tweaking that lower end density to what's existing, I don't really have any heartburn about.
Good.
Changing it from 1 unit per acre to current regulation, or I don't know, just something like that. I don't think it's appropriate.
Does the county suburban, does that yellow follow exactly the urban growth boundary?
For the most part, not exactly. When you look at the map, especially the revised map that we did for that, especially that area when you start going southeast toward Epps Mill Road, in that area, you can kind of see the Epps Mill Road area. We did expand it a little bit in that direction, going down 231 in that area. For the most part, though, it's going to follow the UGB, especially on that eastern side. Between Smyrna and Murfreesboro and that area, I mean, that's pretty much going to be all urban growth boundary down in there. Around Eagleville, I think that's where we did leave it, was the urban growth boundaries. So to answer your question, for the most part, yes. There does some areas that do go outside of it, though. So.
I thought on the sidewalk, I had the privilege of living in a place that had sidewalks. My wife and I both seemed like we always got out in the road, didn't have to dodge trees. So, we just walked on the road. I think as far as too much government trying to tell me as a developer how to put in a subdivision where the sidewalk be, we want to get Plan Rutherford pushed on down the way. Less government, better procedures at planning stage, whatever that needs to be. As far as the integrity of what our county looks like, start trying to do too much on specific. I think that's what gives people a hard time with government. So I'd say that's a topic of other.
I may not say this exactly right, but the lower end density of the county suburban to me is transitional into the rural living higher density. And we can distinguish features, the county suburban being the underground utilities, the sidewalks and things that distinguish those features, where we could put in the same language like we did the higher end of the rural that says if these things exist or infrastructure is assumed to exist in the county suburban that supports that higher density, but there's distinguishing features like sidewalks will be required in some of those, but we can look on a case basis to allow a higher density, but I think leaving it as it is, do it much like we did the higher end on the rural living and put some language in that says there is a definite difference between the two, but in this transitional area, there could be higher densities allowed by application or bringing that proposal to us. But the distinguishing features would still exist. The rural living wouldn't require the sidewalks and other things that the suburban would, if that makes sense, what I'm saying there.
Right. I mean, I think I see where you're going with it. Just a matter of how to word that.
Yeah, I'm not.
You know what I mean? It's so I think I understand where Michael, where you're going with it, but I also understand where Jim Thompson was as well, where the whole reason for the plan is not to get down, at least for what we're doing, is not to get into the nitty gritty of where we're going to require sidewalks and not. That's really more the zoning and the subdivision regulations, developing some kind of a policy or something like that that's defined in the ordinances. So there's no question. If you're in this area, and I mean, I'm just going to throw out some examples. Let's say you're within a mile of a school or something like this, yes, you need to have sidewalks or something like that. My biggest concern with just, blanket requiring sidewalks everywhere is, okay, you've got sidewalks in your subdivision, that's great, but is it connected? Exactly. Is it connected to a network? Okay, you have some bike ped areas in here, but then you're tied onto a road that just has very limited shoulder. Is that really something you want to do? I don't know. I mean, that's why I'm saying there needs to be discussion on those things.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I disagree.
No,
I'm just
it's
saying there needs to be some well thought out reasons
Yeah.
for those kind of things.
And those are zoning regulations.
Correct.
Things, but just to give an idea, I think in the plan of what the intention of that lower density, you could apply for a higher density on the lower end, but it may require you to do this or that, kind of
Right,
same
and it
as
is,
school.
yeah, and it is a range. It's not saying that you have to have 1 unit per acre within the urban growth boundaries. Again, we're not looking to rezone in the urban growth boundaries. We're just to downzone anything. We're just not.
But again, they could
But
apply.
somebody could apply. Yeah, somebody could apply and say, well, I want larger lots. Okay, fine, we don't care. We'll have large, you don't have to rezone it to do that. Just have larger lots. But, of having that range right through there of 1 unit per acre all the way up to 5, I mean, even somebody comes in with a 3 unit per acre type subdivision, I mean, that's allowed. It's within the ranges. So, like I said, I don't have any heartburn changing it. If we do leave it, it's just a matter of how do we say what we're saying here.
In the plan, can you distinguish it as recommendations of this is the intention of that county suburban area? It's not, it is distinguishably different than the rural, but you're assuming that the infrastructure is there, it's closer to the business centers, those features would be there. It's not saying it's a requirement, just things we would look for to allow that density.
Exactly. In fact, when you look at, there was a reasoning for putting these pages in there, not just the fact they're pretty. If you look at land use on each division of them, when he got to county suburban, he was talking about, it shows the subdivisions are there. Every one of them's got sidewalks in them. If you look at the pictures as it goes through there. So when you get to the land use characterized as a subdivision, and that's what they've tried to do right here to show what they are and what they look like. So you're showing what they're there and what they're characterized in there. They just hadn't used the word sidewalk that's there. I mean, that's what we're talking about. So,
I did just want to,
when we pinpoint too close to what we're trying, but we'll get down to the fact that, you got to have, how to put everything down. That's not what the Plan Rutherford's all about. It's dealing with the land use, totally what we're trying to do there. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to add, I do appreciate having the verbiage there, just to have that documented out. I certainly have heard the different discussions, but that's something I would like to see more is sidewalks. I know we cannot requirement, but I did like that idea of just having just what the features, aside from just the pictures, but the features of what we would look like for this area to look like, and then just having a little bit of language that just says, hey, this is what some of those features may be, or some recommendations around it. So that way, when we go to potentially enforce what those zoning changes will look like, it's all consistent.
I agree that having having the verbiage in there to paint the picture of what, if you want higher density, this is the things that we're going to be looking for. I totally agree with that. And that takes it away from being a requirement, but it's just saying, this is the traits, these are the features that something with higher density, like 5, I mean, that's 8,600 square foot lots, I mean, that's.
What about up there where you got county suburban land use characterized as subdivisions with sidewalks? See that?
Oh, yes, okay.
Characterized as subdivisions with sidewalks?
Yeah, he's talking about at the top of the.
Bike lanes or anything like that.
Or just,
Just put it
things
right
you-
up there in your land use
Yeah.
character.
And this was the areas I was thinking about, we could beef up some language just to say, okay, if we're going to do it, but again, I agree with what Jim was saying, maybe not getting so specific that we're saying we're trying to require these things, but saying that when you start getting into these higher density type developments, this is typically what you see in these areas. It's something with more, amenities and different things that you would typically see in a higher density type development. Yeah.
That would have it in there.
And then again, that gets back to the recommendations in the later parts of the plan about changing your regulations to be consistent with this. But that's a whole nother discussion. Yeah, I mean, even if, kind of get back to Lee to what you were saying, even if you go through this and say, okay, well, we see that there's the ability for sidewalks and things and subdivisions over here, but in these, in these other areas, maybe not so much, like you said, like the rural living, rural preserve, whatever. Those are things that you can dictate in the regulations, not necessarily, the plan isn't going to say, well, you have to have sidewalks everywhere. That's not what we're looking for, because that's not really the place of the long-range plan, in my opinion. But
Okay?
so regarding that lower end density, I guess that's kind of what started the discussion. Are we wanting to leave it as is? Do we want to put some, kind of talk about the language, changing some of the language in here to just, what direction are we going here? So I know what to tell our consultant team.
I think it stays consistent with the transition to rural living. So I think it stays the same. And then I can't remember what's in that typical form section on the summary sheet. That would be the areas that may be distinguishing features. It may already have that in there. I just can't remember what it says.
The what you were saying?
The typical form, I think it says in the
Oh.
the summary sheet there. So looking. at
1 to
the
2
screen,
story
so-
buildings, flexible setbacks.
And I can't remember if that's what that says, if that might be the appropriate place to.
Well, that might be, actually looking at, that might be the place to talk about what, Pettis, you were just bringing up.
Distinguishing
as far as
features
distinguishing
between that.
features.
Right.
Yeah, that
And
might be
same
the
thing with
place.
Rural living.
Yeah,
We look at
yeah.
infrastructure and.
Are you saying putting that in typical form?
That's
If it's
kinda what
not already in there. Because
Yeah, I think so. Because, from our very first draft to this one, we've gone the original one was up to 3 units per acre, and now this says up to 5. So if you want me to swallow that, I want to have verbiage in there that says exactly what the character features of a 5 residential units per acre density looks like. And I think, for me, it would be things like sidewalks, bike lanes, parks. I want this on the record. Put my microphone up, let's back up. Oh, there we go. Okay. Is accessible green space, because a step field, in my opinion, is not green space because nobody can get on it. And so accessible, I want the word accessible green space in there. If you want me to agree to 5 units per acre.
Well, that could be put right up there.
Right there, yeah. Now that my mic is on, it's in there, so
And
thank you.
adequate Wi-Fi?
Yeah, yes.
Oh, goodness. I was about to say something, but that completely threw me off my train of thought.
So Doug, along with that, if we're keeping this up to 5 residential acres, I'm going back to the question that you asked in your writing here. Are we keeping the existing residential zoning densities, primarily RM in these areas instead of 1 residential unit per acre? So are you saying we're going to go from this to up to 5? From the current
I think that's what I was suggesting
15,000
was,
square feet.
yeah, as a possible, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to talk over you, I'm sorry, I'm really not. Go finish your thought there so I can.
No, I think I'm done. I'll hear your response.
Okay.
That's-
My thought was so that there wouldn't be as much concern from those who were asking about the topic to me. Yeah, they look at this, oh, that means the county's going to start zoning in this county suburban area, starting to downzone everything, so it's 1 unit per acre. No, that's not at all what we want to do here. It's just a range. So I was like, okay, do you want to change the lower range to what the current zoning is, which in most cases is the RM, which is 3 units per acre, and just have it anywhere from 3 to 5 units per acre as a rough estimate? Do we want to just leave it as is and maybe add some language, the intent is not to change the zoning in the, that's not what we're looking to do. Again, that defeats the purpose of the plan to do that. So while I understand the concern, when you take it to its logical conclusion, if we were to do something like that, it has the opposite effect of what we're trying to do. So, yeah, I think with adding some of these things in, I think we're okay there. But my point was, those are the concerns that I've been receiving. And I don't have a problem if we were to change something like that, but that's where the concern was coming from.
So what you're proposing is on lower end, just leave that at RM.
Yeah, or say something like current allowable density or current zoning or something like that.
And then on higher end, it'll be up to 5 residential units per acre if it meets the requirements we were talking about with sidewalks and accessible places.
Well, yes. I think that goes into typical form, accessible green space, those kind of things. And then that's left to determine what does that all mean. That's where the regulations come into play. There's separate public hearings for all of that. There's going to be plenty of time for dialogue on that when the time is right to pull those things up.
So,
Yes.
but you would still have to go through rezoning if your property was zoned RM and you wanted 5 units per acre, you'd have
Right.
to go through rezoning.
Right. At that point, you're looking at a planned development or something like that, correct?
I'm just
Yeah.
kind of setting expectations.
Right.
You're not going to be any worse off than you are now. But if you wanted to do more, you expect to meet some certain minimum standards that say it's got to be a nice.
I think that's a fair
Basically
summary.
what we're saying.
Yeah, that's a fair summary what we're talking about.
It worries me when you get quiet like this.
All right, so
It's just different, like this is different because it's not making motions, but I think I'm fine with, like, me personally, I'm fine with that option. So just change the lower density to 3 units per acre, leave it as up to 5 residential units per acre, and then add in the verbiage in the typical form that would say to get higher density, these are some of the traits we're looking for.
You're basically tweaking it, is what you're doing. Okay?
okay. All right. Well, unless there are other questions or concerns, those were the big topics.
Yeah.
I'll try. Okay. To summarize what we've talked about today, under the rural preserve, which was the highest of the lot sizes, if you will, we're going to keep the 15-unit, the 1 residential unit per 15 acres, but we're going to add some language in there incorporating potential voluntary larger lot zoning like Williamson County has, which is also consistent with one of the recommendations in the plan on page 90. For the rural living, we are going to, based on my understanding, we're going to leave the density alone, but we're really going to reference that language in pages 56 and 57, which is that application of policy, which is on that handout that I gave you, which essentially is saying just because it might be a little different than what is typically called for in that district, it doesn't mean it's a hard no, regardless if somebody wants to make an application. Somebody can always ask. So for the county suburban, we're going to up the lower end density to 3 units per acre and then add some language maybe in typical form or somewhere on this page just saying that, for higher density subdivisions, we're going to want to see amenities that you would typically see in a higher density development, such as open space, accessible open space, such as sidewalks, et cetera, something like that. And then on the page 82, that one action item for affordable housing, we're going to change that from a long-term to a short-term horizon. As I understand it, those were the decisions we came to. Is that pretty much everybody's understanding here? I'm seeing a lot of nods, so that's good. Okay, very good. All right. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get with our consultant team and talk to them about the changes that need to be made, ask them to incorporate those changes into the plan. I'm also going to talk to Nick about, after sending him kind of a synopsis of the changes, as to whether or not this needs to have, if we feel that this needs to have another public hearing because the changes are significant to the point where they should have another public hearing. We don't have to make that decision today. That's something Nick and I have already talked about, but now that we have a better idea of what changes we're making, we're not making any changes to the map or anything, it's really just the language to the text. So we'll discuss that a little further. If it is a situation where it just needs to be no public hearing and just a vote, I do believe it does need to be at least duly noticed that, yes, we are going to have a vote on this, but there's not going to be another public hearing. So we'll stay tuned on that. So, Pettis, that's pretty much all I have, unless you had anything further you wanted to talk about.
That's all I have, because it's important that we let people know when we're going to vote and do that and go forward. Anything anybody else wants to bring forward? I appreciate your input and what we've got. And
Yes.
it's been a long 3 years.
And I want to thank the Planning Commission and those people that have given me comments as well. Obviously, when we come up with the first draft, we knew that wasn't going to be the final draft, so we do appreciate the comments. I think anything that we put in here, these tweaks to the plan, I think, is it going to be a situation where everybody's going to be completely happy with it? I don't think so. I don't think any plan, any document, zoning, whatever you come up with is going to be perfect. There is no such thing. But I think having the input makes it better. So, and I think it gave us a chance to kind of explain where we're coming from as staff as far as, again, what we're looking to do, what we're not looking to do from a rezoning standpoint. That's going to be a whole different ballgame whenever we get to that point as far as the changes that need to be made to the zoning ordinance and the zoning map. That's going to be a whole nother process. But I do appreciate the input, and I do appreciate the feedback from the Planning Commission today.
I appreciate it. I went by a church this morning. They had a sign up that says, the man that goes down the middle of the road, sooner or later he gets run over. And they all stepped out of the middle of the road and you decided to go down the right lane, and I appreciate it and you being here this morning. So if there's nothing else, we will be adjourned.